have just heard, industrial cyber risks continue to increase, and OT infrastructures are not secured well enough. So how can we actually avoid security risks to entire IT and OT systems? Well, here with us to talk about the next challenges in security is Thomas Tschersich, CTO and CSO Deutsche Telekom Security. Hey Thomas, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure for us. Thank you so much for your time. As well as Theresa Payton, former White House CIO and cybersecurity entrepreneur. Hey, Theresa, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Perfect. And our next guest is Pierre-Alain Graf, SVP Global Security Business, Hitachi ABB Power Grids. Hey, Pierre-Alain, how are you doing?
Good afternoon. Thank you very well, and yourselves. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. It's great. So Pierre, maybe we start with you. What are today's most severe OT security challenges for the energy industry sector? Maybe you can tell us more about that.
Yes, my pleasure. So I think if I look back when I started as a CEO of a power grid company in 2008, and I look today, we've gone through a tremendous journey at that time. But if you look into more specific time sequences, you see that between 2008 and 2015, not a great deal did really happen on the power industry. I mean, there was still this belief of being isolated, secured, and fashioned. It's only when some very well-known attacks were published that there became broad awareness and regulatory steps were taken and people started to also fortify their infrastructures. If you look in terms of what today the biggest challenges are, I think it's not so much technology. I think technology needs to ramp up. If I stay with technology as a first point, it is certainly the legacy equipment because, as you know, these type of energy equipment have a lifespan of 30, 40, maybe even 50 years at times. And if you think back 50 years ago, there was not a lot of cybersecurity threats around. So that's where this integration is one thing. But the more important things are actually people, processes, awareness, adapting the operations in such a way and building the right capabilities in time to really defend, if you want, an infrastructure. So I think that's where the main focus is. And the second challenge is the speed with which the attacks develop. If you look at the technology side, as I mentioned earlier, we have 40 to 50 years life cycle, maybe 30 years in the past, right? Attacks might change every 24 hours. And that's the difference, I think, is one of the biggest challenges in the industry.
Yeah, good point. So what would you say, what framework do we need?
So to address this people, process, and technology integration, I think the security needs to leave the techies corner. Right? Today, security is taken care of by a security department, security specialists, maybe some operational technology specialists, but it's still not, despite all regulations, still not a fully integrated framework. So I think, first of all, we need a framework from board of directors to the bottom of the chain and vice versa, because it goes both ways. And this is, by the way, in what we've been addressing in the World Economic Forum, in the work group I'm chairing. The second framework or type of frameworks we need to be unified. What do I mean by that? We have, globally speaking right now, quite a numbers of framework. All are valid in their own way, but the moment you start to have border-crossing businesses, it starts to be very demanding. And technology is global. Technology is not national, right? So I think this kind of harmonization of framework is going to be very important to do that. And then the last aspect of framework, I think we need to have a framework which looks into the future, right? Regulations today look based on incidents from the past, and there's no other way regulations could be. That's the way they need to do it. But we need to think about frameworks. How do we anticipate things going forward as things move faster than as explained earlier?
All right. Another question for you, Pierre, and maybe also for you, Thomas. Do IT security folks really need OT support to respond to IT problems when industry incidents occur. What would you guys say about that?
Yeah, maybe before we come to that, let me add one point to
Sure.
what Pierre already said. Yeah, in my view, the security stuff is pretty much arrived in the board areas with regards to IT security, but for OT security, it's total different picture. Yeah, so there's still the impression all these things are disconnected, but in the meantime, they got connected for sure. Yeah, so it's developing rapidly. Things being connected, as Pierre mentioned, in the energy sector, not being designed for working in a connected environment. So nobody's really taking care, patching vulnerabilities in these systems. And attackers simply don't care about that we're organized that weak. Yeah, attackers just going for the easy way to get to their victim. And when it's an OT system, they use that way. So therefore, we need to bundle and combine more the forces. And by the way, that's the reason why we're going to introduce a partnership together with Pierre, Hitachi, ABB, Deutsche Telekom, and Securitas in the OT space later today as well.
Good point. Pierre, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, to the question you asked about IT and OT people, let me quickly share a small anecdote. When I started 2008, my biggest challenge was to bring my IT people and my OT people into the same room. Right? And my CIO at that point in time said, Pierre, it's easier to have a gardener entering a substation than me as an electrical engineer as a CIO, because there is a lack of trust. So first of all, I think it's a cultural topic. People think totally different.
Yeah.
And that's why also they need each other, because the way to do something. The second reason why I think they really need each other is because the systems are totally different. Whilst in IT security, the primary system is the computer. In energy or electricity or even rail or wherever you have OT, the primary system is something totally different in the physical world. And you need to understand how this is running and how it's working before you take any measures in there. So I think this strong bonding between IT and OT people is critical. And I think it might come a time where people will have both curriculums, but I think it will take another 10 years at least to get to that stage, I think.
But it seems like you all agree on IT and OT should join forces.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's no way around, yeah. As it's more and more integrating. Even if it's different technology today, we still have also areas. Look in the production plant of a car manufacturer, for instance, where OT these days is now becoming the same technology than in the IT world. Yeah, so same technology, same threats, but still different silos managing these technologies, and that's the biggest fault.
Yeah, Theresa, I'm really curious to hear from you how we can most effectively help OT infrastructure operators to safeguard their environments.
Yeah, I love everything that's been said so far and completely agree with the recommendation around sort of the different levels of frameworks. The other thing that I would advise OT to be thinking about is, what are the user stories as the user actually interacts with the technology? Because that's where the frameworks don't always do us the full service. Because it's really the user interacting with the technology, whether it's remote access to that technology, connecting machine to machine, or programs to programs. And those user stories are really so important to understand whether vulnerabilities and gaps exist. You know, right now, the frameworks are often very technology centric, which is something Pierre mentioned earlier. And the user stories will really tell us where, in sort of the practicality of boots on the ground using a technology, where those breakpoints are going to happen. So really sort of user-centered design is going to be where security by design is going to be at the forefront. The other place that I think that OT could really benefit from is the information sharing across their own industry, but in other industries, and looking for sort of those best practices. And in a very safe space, in a confidential way, the ability to actually share near misses and misses, sort of mistakes that were made, and how did you, as an organization, what did you have in place to be more resilient and more reliable? That's really the key. The key isn't to say, can we prevent all bad things from happening? Because that's impossible. And so really it has to be about, how do we, when something bad happens, how do we respond? How do we recover? And how resilient and reliable will our systems be based on the design? And so really looking at opportunities for micro segmentation of every layer in the architecture for OT is really important. And then looking for that opportunity to build in, sort of kill switches and fail safes, so that in the event that an incident is occurring, you can go shields up and allow some availability and reliability for some operations while you're dealing with an issue, instead of a complete and total down.
Yeah. Pierre, what's your view on that?
So interesting. I think it's excellent points which were made here, and I think what I like to pick on the last one. Interesting enough, if you build an electrical system, resilience is built in. For any type of faults, of any type of errors, you have security systems, safety systems, all of that. It's just not done for cybersecurity at the moment, because that was not part of the question. So the thinking is here, and I think this information sharing and this resilience thinking needs to be simply transferred into the next level of interaction. The other point, which I've totally agree on, is about this human-machine type of interaction. There are still too many human-machine interaction in critical processes, where I think going forward, specifically related to cyber, systems should and will recognize that there is an anomaly and stabilize the self and stabilize the operational by themselves until the problem has been resolved. Coming back to Jerry's point about this no breakdown, full breakdown, but simply maybe some kind of local problem, but not a total problem. And the costs of security of supply, or the breach of security of supply, being so high, I think there is a very strong incentive to build that.
All right, thank you very much.
I have a different aspect to that angle as well. So what we do see these days, that some of the security challenges were produced by security professionals. Sounds crazy, but giving you an easy example on that, yeah? So when introducing strong passwords, for instance, 12 characters, certain complexity, and you have to change every single week. This will result in that everybody typed a password on a post-it, on a sticky note, and put it on their screen. So by just having a good intention, you can also create a great fault in the security level. And this is what we need to change. Yeah, we need to, with Theresa's words, to build security not from engineers to engineers, but from engineers to real people, to real humans, to make usable security. And it's even more important in technology, which stays there for a decade or longer, which is not that often changed. Yeah, therefore it's even more important to build in, to think right from the beginning in the design phase how to secure these devices. So I'm also from a background an electrical engineer, like Pierre, and when I studied, the power switches and the high voltage grids were controlled from the building in the substation. Yeah. And now they're still the same switches, but now controlled from a central point in the country. So nobody thought about building in cybersecurity for that connections from the first point, because it was all separated. Yeah, and think about what's happening when we integrate more and more and more. Or take an example out of the car industry. My famous hack for a connected car was to use the air pressure sensor in the wheel, and to hack from that into the engine control system.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's crazy. But these effects are there if you not think security right from the beginning and build it in right from the beginning.
Yeah. You are talking a lot with the whole security community. So let's talk about that for a second, because when you have a lot of conversation with them, I think you know exactly what their main concerns may look like. Is it intellectual property theft, or is it maybe something else?
No, from my perspective, it's something totally different.
Okay.
We not really often talk about. It's that most of the security people are concerned not to have the right attention in the companies. Yeah, that they were not treated equally to the businesses. But the problem is within the security organization itself. If you position yourself as a roadblock, everybody will see you as a roadblock, yeah, and everybody try to turn around you, yeah, and try to pass by with whatever you're doing. And if you want to treat it equally to them, you need to talk to them in the business language. You need to understand their needs, and you need to integrate as a security professional in their processes. Because otherwise, you're the enemy number one in the company, and if you're the enemy number one, you have exactly zero influence, yeah? And that's the biggest issue these days. I think it's an attitude question. It's not the technical one, but if you look on the attack surface, it's still that we're not doing our homework. So 95% of all the attacks are being possible because of missing software updates. People still don't do their homework. They don't patch their systems. And when a huge company like Microsoft is introducing a critical update for fixing critical vulnerability, they're not telling in public what exactly they fixed. They're just saying, so we fix a critical vulnerability which can allow you to gather administrative access. So no details on that. But what we see is within less than 4 to 5 hours, the first full automized attacks flowing through the internet. So in the meantime, there were some reverse engineers working and figure out what exactly was the vulnerability, writing an exploit code, and then scanning on large scale the whole internet. And this can be avoided by just simply patching the systems. And that's an easy one. It's not that costly. You just have to do that. You don't have to invent something new. Yeah, and I would say that's the biggest issue still we do have these days.
All right, good to know. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear your thoughts on that because I can only imagine that you need a lot of extra knowledge when you have already IT security skills and you want to deliver OT security. Is it like that or is it different, Theresa?
It's a little different, but the main advice that I give to security professionals, because I agree with what was said, a lot of times the security team is really just the know on the way to putting something into production, and that's not good for a line of business. And really what you need to say is, I'm a business professional in my industry who does security for my job. And if you take that line of thinking, you go into every conversation with the line of business to say, what's the mission? What's the vision? What are we trying to accomplish here as a business? And how do I enable that for you so that it's secure, reliable, resilient, and private? And so if you change your mindset, you're going to ask different questions. You're going to be asked to be at the design table instead of you're the last milestone in a long line of implementations, and you're just what stands between us and going to production. I think that the other thing that, based on your question, that's really important to mention as well, is that if you are a student of your job, you can transcend IT and OT. And I do highly recommend that different businesses think about rotational assignments where they take security and development professionals on the technology teams and actually rotate them, even if it's for a year. Because you're going to have better thinking from an enterprise architecture. The idea that IT and OT are physically, logically, and systems-wise always separated, that notion is an outdated notion. There's much more integration, and there will continue to be much more integration there.
Felt like you wanted to add something.
Yeah, agree. And the reason why we did a partnership with Hitachi ABB and Pierre and his team is exactly that we do have a lot of knowledge on IT and how to deal with these attacks. The processes are equally the same you need to use, but we don't have any clue about what's really happening in these industrial control systems. And therefore, you need to bring together really this knowledge to learn from each other, but also to support each other. Yeah, but it's tough, and we would never be in the position knowing more about these industrial control systems than the vendor. Yeah, so therefore it perfectly fits together in my view. Such alliances like we are currently driving out, and to combine these forces to become better at the market. And there's also a different aspect. So we as T-Systems, Deutsche Telekom Group, are known for telecommunication. And when you talk to the OT people at the customer side, they have no clue what to deal with you, because they say, hey, this is IT stuff. We know you for IT stuff. Please go to our CIO. If you're talking to the CTO, so Pierre is the natural peer for them. So that's perfectly bringing together both worlds, I would say.
Great answer. Yeah.
And if I might
sure.
might just chime in on that one, it's vice versa, right? So if it's on IT side, people say, no, let's go to the IT guys, not to the OT guys, right? So I think it's and the journey we speak maybe a little bit about that, but the journey we've done together and our teams have done together of two companies confirms that. There's been a tremendous learning during the last 24 months between the different teams.
And by the way, if I can make a comment about patching. Do we have a moment on patching? Because as a former CIO, I can tell you why a lot of times patching doesn't happen right away. And it's not an excuse, it's just a reality, is that implementing patches does break things. And it would be great if we all had a production environment that and had a quality assurance and testing environment that looked just like production. But we obviously, many organizations don't have that kind of money and resources. And so my recommendation back to the industry is, again, when you think about micro-segmentation of your networks, your data, your user access controls, the different operating systems within OT, the different applications within IT, if you can do true segmentation, you can do patching and know that if it does break something because of the segmentation layers you put into place, chances are taking the risk of patching is worth it, because the impact of breaking something because of that micro-segmentation you've done is going to be much smaller than the impact of not patching. So I just want to make that comment, because patching seems to be one of the holy grails we're unable to achieve. And we're at a point right now where you can kind of go with that risk that it might break something if you have the right segmentation in place.
But interestingly enough,
if I might add, I tried to prevent from making a comment on patching, but I think that's where there's a definite huge difference between OT and IT on patching. And when you patch OT systems, the amount of effort and the amount of, at least today, right, the amount of effort you need to put in there, the amount of diligence you need to put in there is totally different. It's a really, really critical process to do, but I think there are ways to do it, but that's where there's a big difference. And I think also as a manufacturer, we need to find new ways on how we can make patching easier if necessary.
One interesting observation, and I agree with what Theresa said at the one hand, but at the other hand, it's now for fact that more outages are driven by missing patches than by faulty patches these days. So it starts turning around, yeah, and we really need to catch up. And one way to catch up, for instance, is when you talk about the desktop systems of your employees in the organization. At Deutsche Telekom, in former times, we did a lot of integration testing. It took us months before we got permission to roll out the patch to all these workplaces. But we nowadays changed the system. Yeah? We just roll it out on a small number of systems. Once they're able to work the next day, we roll it out to the next group. Once they're also able to work, we roll it out to the whole organization. So that's also a way of doing it smarter than before. But there's also one number I want to share about the OT stuff. We did just recently a survey and asked our clients together with Hitachi ABB about are they affected by attacks on their OT systems? And 50% of the customers said yes, they are, and 25 said we had severe problems because of that. So in total, 75% of our customers saying we do have issues here. And we don't have the solution yet.
Yeah, great you just said that, because I feel like many companies might think that OT security is just another big cost factor rather than really something that helps them. Theresa, maybe you can tell us more about that. If the production manager maybe asks you why he should spend significant budget on OT security, what would be your answer to that?
So I actually have a process for it's not easy, but it's worth it to actually look at the return on investment for security. And so what I recommend is you have an incident response playbook for that particular outage, for that particular cyber incident, and estimate the cost of not investing in security, of what that outage could cost you, what the cleanup from the cyber incident could cost you. And then ask yourself the time to implement, the friction to implement the security strategy, and then redo that playbook knowing that you have some of the security investments in place. Obviously, your risk goes down, the impact of an outage should go down, your resiliency and uptime should go up. And what is the delta between making the investment or that original playbook without the investment? And that can give you a really good sort of, that delta is your return on investment potentially for that particular playbook. So I recommend, because it can be a little complex to identify what the return is and why there's a true financial and reputation benefit to doing it. And so I always say start with those playbooks around incident response and then basically layer in those investments and look at what the cost differential is. That oftentimes makes the case itself.
I can share some numbers on that. As we did also a lot of forensic stuff and helping customers out of such situations once they're attacked. So it easily can cost you up to 1 to 200 million euros. And this is just because you were not willing to invest 10 million euros upfront in a stable security organization. Yeah, so it's a huge factor between what you need to invest and what you have to pay if you don't do.
But I guess there are still big obstacles of implementing an effective IT security. Maybe we can talk a bit about that, rather than just a lot of money.
Yeah, I would say one of the obstacles, and I heard from customers, is definitely the shortage of skills at the market. Yeah, it's really tough to get the experts at the market. So I would say forensic people, for instance, in cyber are the best paid staff on the market these days. And how to overcome that challenge. And therefore, I guess it's a good solution, not only while we're providing such services, but go to service providers like us and to bundle these forces. So look, we started with our offering from our managed cyber defense out of a perspective just doing it for Deutsche Telekom alone. We learned about how to protect the critical infrastructure on huge scale across different nation states, and then decided to open that up for customers. We brought in customers like Linde, with also a global operation producing liquid gas, for instance, and brought them in. And we start then sharing the IOCs, the indicators of compromise between Deutsche Telekom and Linde. So therefore, we can create, so let's call it the magenta umbrella over our customer base. Once something happened at Deutsche Telekom, we can immediately protect Linde and other customers for that, and the other way around. And this is what we are now going to extend in the OT space, to learn and adapt much faster by having these shared operations from a service center. This might be a good answer if you're looking as a customer today how to solve that and not really getting your hands on the resources you would need for that, doing that job yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, it's not about doing something completely alone, it's all about building partnerships.
Yeah, and at the end you need also the people on the customer side. You cannot really make cyber defense without having the IT specialist on the customer side, as they have the knowledge about the details, how the systems are connected to each other, but also how the processes are implemented in the company. It's often not only about, when we talk about mitigating an attack, it's not only about talking about IT systems, it's also about talking about the processes, figuring out which systems are really critical, which are not. And it often turned out that the systems seem to be critical, are the less critical ones in an organization. And if you focus then on the wrong things, you can also fail, yeah? And so therefore you need the partnerships from the technology side, but you need also the partnership, this is really important, with the customer to drive those cyber defense activities really to the next level.
Yeah, Theresa, how do you feel about that? Is it possible to do it all by yourself, or do you need partnerships?
Partnerships. One of the best things that each organization can do is sit down and decide, what do you want to have as your business's core competency? You know, what's your on your security team, on your technology team for IT and OT, what makes you unique and special, and a competitive advantage is to have your own resources running and managing those components. And from a risk perspective, having those be your own resources. And then identify all the other things that need to be done on that list. And if they don't have to be done in-house, ask yourself, can I find a variety of good partners? Because you're going to get a different mindset, a different skill set, and people who are experiencing both sort of on the proactive and the reactive side, different types of incidents and technologies, and they'll bring that to bear to your team. I think the other thing to be thinking about here is some of the trends of going to more kind of the proactive conversations. I loved the conversation around, you know, you could spend 10 million and potentially save 100 million or more if you had an incident. I think those types of statistics are really helpful. The other trend I'm seeing in the industry that is also helpful is it typically, to tap into your cyber liability insurance policy, something terrible had to happen. What's interesting is I'm starting to see a movement in the cyber liability industry where they're not only just giving discounts for doing something proactively. In some regards, you can actually use your insurance policy to pay for outside experts to do, for example, a proactive threat hunting. So I think there's a lot to be gained by thinking about what are the relationships and partnerships I can bring to bear, how can I rotate them into different parts of the ecosystem, and really leverage a variety of different skill sets that are available out there.
And interestingly enough, yeah, if you talk about corporate sneakers, nobody come to the idea to build their own sneakers. But in IT, it's different. It's really different. Yeah, you have a food production company, and they have the idea we can do better in IT than others. That makes no sense at all.
Yeah, it's a good point. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the future. So I know it's hard to guess what's exactly going to happen, but I still think it's super interesting. Like both from the defender's perspective, like new technologies, artificial intelligence, etc., and from the attacker's perspective, are there going to be new types of attacks, etc.? So maybe Pierre, you can start with that.
That's a tough question to speak about the future as the first one, right? So well, I think what's going to happen specifically, and we need to make a distinction in which areas you will have, from an attacker perspective, you have the biggest reward. I think we spoke about this earlier on. What is the cost of outage? There are, unfortunately, certain areas of the society which are becoming part of a kind of a warfare. And there you will see some quite advanced technologies, also from an attacking perspective, to be developed, because it's still cheaper than do any other type of war part. So any critical infrastructure, I think we should expect quite advanced attack patterns coming over time, because there's a lot of resources and a lot of funding happening in that side. From a defending perspective or defense perspective, I think in these technologies, I expect to have rather quickly more of kind of artificial intelligence. I know it's a buzzword, but kind of a machine learning at least to drive this type of self-healing, stabilizing systems. I mean, it's not easy, but that's the direction you need to go to, because the human interactions are not fast enough. Let me give you one example. In a transmission system, if the network becomes unstable, typically it's about 20 to 25 minutes time you have to take the right measures before the whole system cascades. And in Europe, the whole system cascading means the whole of Europe, of at least continental Europe, because we synchronously connected. Right? So we need to find technologies which allow to take decisions within these timeframes. And that's, by the way, to come back on the topic of partnerships, that's why I think it's important to also have partners to speed up the decision process with the right depth of knowledge.
So the good one, we are used to act within milliseconds in the IT space.
True. Theresa, maybe you can tell us more about the future of OT security.
Yeah, so there's a couple areas where sort of the reimagining of OT is, kind of accelerating because of the pandemic and the realities of the pandemic. And so it's an exciting time to be looking at extended reality technologies to really augment the ability to, kind of reach out and touch or experience and even perhaps repair OT without actually having to be in close proximity to other people. And so extended reality is really going to be something adopted much more in 2021. As well as Pierre mentioned around artificial intelligence. My prediction is in 2022, one is around AI poisoning will be a thing by cyber criminals. The reason being is because if I was an AI developer, and if you do a good job as an AI engineer, it becomes a black box, it's self-learning, contextually aware, even to a black box to the engineer who initially worked on it. And so there is an opportunity for cyber criminals to either tamper with the algorithm itself or the data that's training the algorithm. And so that's going to be something that needs to be on everybody's playbook watch list to be thinking about for 2022. Also, as we move more into using augmented virtual extended reality for OT, for remote OT systems, and again, for maintenance and interactions, as that technology gets more and more introduced on the OT side, I do believe that the Internet of Behaviors, which is a necessary part of extended reality working, that Internet of Behaviors will also be a target-rich environment for cyber criminals to attack. The Internet of Behaviors is going to be what replaces those complex passwords that are so frustrating to the user today. And so as we move towards emotions, interactions, biometrics, that Internet of Behaviors being something that's used for more identity and access management, that will be also a target in 2022. So take heart. We have time to prepare and get ready for that. I feel like these predictions could be fictional stories and relegated to fictional books if we plan for that in our designs now.
Good point, well said. I got one question from the chat and I would love to read it out to you guys. I often wonder if industry sees a value in data-centric security given the vulnerabilities of IoT. Maybe we can answer that.
Yeah, I would say in future data-centric security will become more important. Yeah, so it's decoupling the data from the data security, at least from the system security. Yeah, so zero trust is a concept which is the first approach in doing so, but nothing predicts so hard than the future. The only thing which is for sure that we will become older in the future. So I believe we will get new capabilities with AI, as the colleagues mentioned before, but I also want to drip a little water in the wine, as most of the technologies we're seeing these days are artificial but not intelligent yet, I would say. And there's a lot of buzzword around these technology, but in real I would predict automation is key. We need to automate more in processing these data, which is then including data security. For instance, if data being automatically encrypted on transport, the user didn't have to care about. And this will provide additional security. Today, it's just you need to click, I want to encrypt this email. And if you change that with technology to make that automatically happen, you will automatically also have more data security. Yeah. So and this is also part of the human-centric story. really build technology which is supporting the people and not which is a burden to them. Which build technology which helps all of us to have more creativity, more new ideas, and more evolved business models in future. But at the same time, we don't have to care that much on security than we have today because it's already in. Like in the car industry. If you buy a car these days, you won't be able to buy a car without a brake or an airbag or a security belt. It's all built in. And this is what we're going to achieve in the IT and OT space as well.
Sounds like a good future to me. Sadly, we are already near the end, so maybe you guys can give us some famous last words and maybe some words to our audience. Anyone wants to start? Some advice or some tips, tricks?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And I learned so much from my esteemed colleagues on this panel, so thank you so much. Really great comments and advice are already provided. I would just sort of leave everybody thinking about there is hope for the future, but the way that we beat cyber criminals at their game on both IT and OT is designing for the human and then building in security like a behind the scenes safety net around the human interactions and around the technology to technology interactions that happen. And outthinking, outsmarting, and outmaneuvering the cyber criminals, that's where if you can get creative in your designs, you can stay one step ahead of them. So you don't have to outspend them all the time. It's outthinking and outmaneuvering.
Well said. Pierre, maybe a few words from you to the end.
So, yes, also thank you very much for this event. I think it tells a lot that T-Systems discusses these topics in such a way, and I think it's very telling. So thanks very much for that. But also thank you for this common journey we had with T-Systems. I think we had worked during the last 24 months with great teams. I think there will be more to come together, and I'm sure you'll hear from us. If you look from security perspective, it's just one thing which we need to focus on is to be relentless, focusing and delivering the different technologies and also observing what's happening in the system. I think today still believe, specifically in the energy sector, and security is not at the level it should be from an attention perspective. And I think if we, all of us and all those listeners here on the forum contribute, I think we'll have a much safer environment jointly by securing the systems.
Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you to Theresa and Pierre for that discussion. So if I look back, and I'm now for almost 20 years in that business, there was a huge development in security. Yeah, from being the unloved children to be in the center of the discussions these days. I would advise anybody listening to us there out in the world to, if you have children, please advise them to study cybersecurity. So there's definitely a lot to achieve in the future. So there's definitely a lot of room for development, and maybe some point in time the CISO is becoming the boss of the CIO. So we will see. Yeah, let's stick to that. Let's work on that, and let's work on making the world a little better and secure.
That sounds good to me. Thank you very much to Theresa, Payton. It was a pleasure for us to have you with us today. Thank you so much for your time. And of course,
Thanks
also
for having me.
To Pierre-Alain, Graf, thank you so much. And we hope you will continue to follow our show, of course, as I have to go to our next speaker now. Thomas, thank you so much for your time, and I see you later.
Thanks for having me. Bye.